Okay, over the last 4 weeks, I've been asking for your biggest headaches with regards to vehicle system forensics and to see whether we've got any answers for you, because there could have been headaches for us in the past, or whether the community can answer them. So I really thank those people for taking time to comment on these on LinkedIn, and to those people that have shared the post as well, which has reached a wider audience. And we have had responses from all over the world, to be fair. So we're going to take a dive into each one that's been highlighted and give you some answers and tips on how to get around some of these headaches in the field of vehicle system forensics. So headache number one comes in from my good, strong Scottish associate, Ian McKinley, who says proactive crime teams that still have no understanding of the consequences of their actions when handling the vehicle, failing to isolate them before searching fingerprints, etc. Yeah, it's a real problem. Crime scene management of a vehicle, both digitally and for more traditional forensics, they both have competing needs, and there are arguments on both sides of the fence that one takes precedence over the other. I'm slightly biased because I'm involved in digital, so I will have a strong argument for saying why things should be left alone or why certain things should be done to preserve digital evidence on a vehicle. But equally, there are other investigations that can be done that could advance that investigation, and it's those competing needs. I guess the best examinations that we've been involved in are those whereby they are meshed together. So you have the digital activities you're going to carry out a vehicle, along with physical processing for, say, fingerprints, DNA, fibres, gunshot residue, depending on the type of investigation. But those first people that are handling a car, and I know Ian is firmly in the camp of dealing with recovered stolen motor vehicles, then if you are handling those vehicles, you do need to be mindful that the amount of powering on the vehicle you do could be undoing some digital opportunities for you to crack the case. And there are some cars that are really susceptible to new data being generated just as a consequence of opening the door or putting the ignition on. And it's not just police officers that are handling the vehicle. The vehicle hits other agencies, so you will have recovery agents that are working on behalf of police forces that start interacting with the vehicle. If the vehicle will drive, they could quite easily drive it onto the back of a low loader, drive it off at the other end when they get to the depot. It could then get moved around the yard 3 or 4 times before somebody actually gets to examine it from a police perspective. And evidence can get skewed that way as well. So handling vehicles is probably one of the biggest headaches for vehicle system forensics investigators, because generally speaking, and from my own experience, we tend to be the last person there as well. So search teams might have gone in to look inside it, scenes of crime people may have gone into it, dogs may have gone into it, and then digital tends to be the last. And there could be an argument to say that digital is actually the first person to go to it. But I'm not saying that is the right thing to do in every case. And you've got to look at what resources you've got versus the need for information. And strategizing crime scenes is really difficult. It's also backed up by Senior Forensics as well, who says that this is a problem with mobile forensics too. And of course, people that are handling mobile phones when they're seized as well can be impacting the digital side of things. So better education, biased I know, but we do have a course on this. It's our vehicle examinations course that looks at crime scene management of vehicles from a digital perspective, but spreading the word as well. So I think as a consequence of this, I will do another presentation that goes into more detail and give some case examples of where it's worked really well versus where it hasn't, and hopefully we can get that message out to people that need to see it in order just to take a step back and think about how they are handling the vehicle when they start interacting with it, if they're involved in the seizure of it or in charge of doing searches of that vehicle. So I hope that helps. It does raise awareness. Thanks for taking the time to comment, both Ian and Sina, on that one. Okay, the second headache came in, and I think it was probably the first, to be fair, but it was from my data privacy contact, Andrea Amico, who says, LE, law enforcement, not getting a warrant count. I think what he means is he's seen a lot of data being obtained from vehicles whereby the authority has not been in place for somebody to get that information. And it is a really valid point, because sometimes the car isn't acknowledged as a digital device, and examinations proceed without really thinking about under what authority you are examining the vehicle. And we have it as a checklist in our question to the person that's inquiring with us: under what authority have you got permission for us to examine this vehicle for personal data? Because don't forget, the car can have many users. So you take a hire car, for example, you could have 50, 60, 70, 80 different users, and you could be accessing personal data about those people. So it's not just under what authority, you've also got to think of it from a disclosure perspective as well, and how you're going to manage that in your investigation going forwards. And you don't want to get to the end of an investigation for it to become quickly unravelled by somebody asking you a question: under what authority did you examine this vehicle digitally? And you're not having the correct answer or the correct authority in place when you've done it. So you may need to get a warrant. You may, in the UK, be acting under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. You may get the owner's consent. Don't forget, you may have a keeper as well of the vehicle. Company vehicles are going to cause you a big headache when you've got multi-users from a company as well. So it does have far and wide-reaching consequences when you are accessing the data on a vehicle. And there are all sorts of things going on globally over what is personal data and whether the VIN is actually personal data or not. And I'm not going to get into those arguments. I'm going to signpost you to Andrea Amico. He runs a company called Privacy for Cars. And if you want to learn more and dive into it, that's where I'm signposting you to get your first taste of what that looks like from a professional that's been dealing with it since 2014. So that's over 10 years in the field of dealing with that. So as I said, sometimes these headaches, if you want to scratch under the surface with that one, I'm going to point you to another resource in Privacy for Cars and Andrea Amico to understand it a little bit better if you're struggling. Okay, headache number 3. And this is quite a big headache, but it's not something that can't be worked around. So we've got both Martin Lown and Bob McKay. Bob down in Australia, and if you're watching Bob, I do need to jack up a conversation with you. I think it'd be good for us to have a chat and go into a little bit more detail on this one. And Martin as well, we could potentially do a 3-way podcast, I think, on this, because it would be interesting to get both your thoughts around vehicle fires. Yes, vehicle fires do inhibit a little bit of digital opportunities with vehicles. Just to read Bob's comment out, unfortunately, most, if not all, vehicles I look at are burnt, thus eliminating data downloads. But my biggest problem is along the same lines. The vehicles are not quarantined. Because of that, the vehicle is treated like a rubbish tip. I've even found parts of other burnt vehicles in my subject vehicles. So yeah, storage of vehicles goes back into Ian's issue around crime scene management, is where Bob's referring to there. It does become an issue. Cross-contamination in that scenario is going to be an issue as well. Difficult when you've got burnt out vehicles, and vehicles in general when they're being stored, because the places that they're stored at, they have limited space, and they just keep moving them around, and they'll just try and put them together. People will be potentially having access to those sites that are maybe not that forensically minded. I have known parts being taken off one car that we were going to examine to be put on another one that was in there. Then they were missing some bits, from one vehicle, so they borrowed it off another. It's not ideal. What I would say about burnouts is don't ignore them, because we have had data recovery from some vehicle systems, even though the vehicle's been burnt out. Some infotainment systems and certainly event data recorders can be in an area of the vehicle that does sometimes get well protected by the fire. So certainly around a dash area, the plastic dash areas can start to mould and preserve say an infotainment module whereby I have got examples of us pulling hard drives out of burnt out vehicles that are still intact, and if I put them next to a non-burnt out hard drive, you maybe on first glance wouldn't be able to see the difference because they've been quite well insulated from the fire, and there are opportunities. What I would say is check out Shannon Burgess on LinkedIn. He does some great work on recovering data from burnt out vehicles. He did a post, I think, earlier on this week, which is the beginning of October, around getting data from an airbag control module that had been burnt out. And also our partners, Resolute, they are specialists at recovering data from damaged chips as well. So there are things you can still do. And it again goes back to strategy, because a fire investigator will have certain needs at the vehicle when they go to examine it for the cause of the fire. But if you've got a digital examiner there who maybe knows component locations, etc., and where to go first, and for them to do their bit and remove certain elements without disturbing the fire investigator's part, then it might be another one of those areas where you have the mesh of both activities and it being a more fruitful examination rather than it just being a disregarded option to get data from a vehicle when on the face of it it doesn't seem likely, but there may be a possibility. So I will reach out to Bob and Martin and we'll try and get some collective discussions going on around this in a little bit more detail, because it will be a continuing headache in years to come, I'm sure. And if we can get some resources out there into the community, then it will help those in the future that are encountering these type of incidents in how to best manage them, I say. Okay, headache number 4, and we've got 2 takes on this, really. We've got a comment from Ibe Kingsley down in Nigeria, particularly the challenge of extracting and analysing data from secure vehicle systems. Would you be open to sharing insights or collaborating? So I've reached out to Ibe in person around this, and it's backed up a little bit from Francis, albeit he puts this in a different context. And I know Francis is experienced at getting around these systems, but it makes a really, really valid point that there is no lawful or available means to acquire decrypted data from modern, properly secured vehicle systems, neither with a warrant nor simply collaboration with the manufacturers, because we tend to get a closed door when we try to work with them. We maybe see that in digital forensics as well. We all know the strong privacy ethos that Apple, for example, promotes, and not allowing backdoors to be opened to protect personal data. Manufacturers of vehicles potentially slightly different. I would suggest there's a lot of technologies going into cars as to how they're doing things, and a lot of proprietary information around the technologies as well. I can kind of understand why they want to keep that tight. But maybe there needs to be a little bit more of a cohesion between the manufacturers and law enforcement. And we've seen it in other industries in the past, such as the telecoms industry, whereby originally law enforcement wouldn't have had access to those records. But nowadays it's commonplace to do that. And because the car is also linking in with telecoms, we're already starting to see, certainly in the UK, a little bit more cohesion between the manufacturers and those types of investigations where we're looking for telecoms information from a vehicle as one example. But this is firmly in the physical access of storage mediums on the vehicles themselves. So a lot of the modern ECUs now, a lot of modern infotainment ECUs are becoming very difficult to access and do require special skill. Francis says the situation is a bit of an elephant in the room because systems could be made more secure by disclosing vulnerabilities. And what he's saying there is, we're having to expose vulnerabilities to get access to these systems, but we're not going to tell you about them, i.e. the manufacturer. So we can find a vulnerability in a system and still access data from it, but we're not going to secure it because it means we can't access that from, if the manufacturer decides to close it off. So that's where the two need to become a little bit more cohesive around working together rather than against one another. there's two schools of thought on this for me as time's marched on a little bit. And if you aren't disclosing to the manufacturer a vulnerability that you maybe know exists, could there be an argument, and I'm playing devil's advocate here a little bit, but could there be an argument to say that you are potentially facilitating more crime to be committed? And certainly here in the UK, the ethos of policing from its birth and conception was really the absence of crime as a measure of how effective we are, not how many crimes we are actually detecting. So if, for example, we know that there's a vulnerability on a vehicle system that means personal data is accessible, could we be indirectly facilitating more crime by people accessing personal information? And you don't know how many crimes you may prevent by closing that vulnerability off and speaking to the manufacturer about it versus detecting the crimes that may occur as a result of being able to access that system. It's not an easy one, and as Francis says, this headache holds for most digital forensics, but it is just as well and just as prevalent for vehicles. So this headache isn't going away anytime soon, because as we move forward and new vehicles are coming out on the road, there is all sorts of things that are going to have implications on this across the spectrum. It's going to take me longer than a 5-minute answer to say how you get around this headache, because you've other regulations coming into play around automotive cybersecurity. You've OBD ports being, closed off to a degree, whereby even accessing vehicles to repair them is becoming a little bit of a nightmare for, the second-hand car dealership or the backstreet garage who's still trying to, service those cars that are out there that people want repairing, not a dealer. They've got their own hurdles to overcome as well because of the regulations that are coming out. If you are interested in overcoming some of the more complex systems to get access to them, then there are a number of resources that I can point you to. Those are specialist vehicle system forensics training programs, either Burla over in America that have got a tool that will access some of these systems, Resolute over in Poland, who've recently launched the Vehicle Data Reconstructor, and Apashore ourselves, we do teach some methods on how to overcome some of these systems as well. There isn't much out there that helps you from an open source perspective, and it kind of touches upon, the elephant in the room that Francis is talking about there, whereby if we put out socially some of these exploits, then they're going to get closed off to a degree, and maybe we want to get some more cohesion before we finally get to a stage whereby we're happy to sort of disclose some of those things publicly. So it is a conversation that needs to be taken off social media for the relevant security agencies to discuss, and it's certainly not for me to do that as a independent company. As a former law enforcement operative, then I would encourage those people both in law enforcement and the manufacturers to start having proper conversations and not just paying lip service to it at certain conferences that have been ongoing for a number of years now, because we just seem to be going round and round in circles and not getting anywhere fast on that one. So it's nothing that hasn't been overcome in the past with other technologies. It's just going to take a lot longer to get there, I'm sure. But in the meantime, it's a very fragmented scene to get into some of these systems, and a massive, massive headache. Okay, headache number 5, and we're going to finish where we started, because Ian commented in more than 1 week's posts. Maybe he does need some paracetamol sending up there into Scotland. I'm not sure, but he's got a couple of headaches around this, but he makes really valid points. So that's why we're including this one. How about the generic tick box request from an SIO, think they know it all, that's worded, I want a telematics download, despite the car being from 1982, having no embedded systems, etc. It is a problem. and I'm certainly not critical of SIOs. However, there can sometimes be a tick box mentality around doing certain activities because either it's worked in the past or they have seen it work on other investigations. And sometimes we do need to take a step back because not every car is capable of giving data up. And it is one of my biggest headaches is working out what is possible to get data from a car in an investigation, because there are so many cars just here in the UK alone. To know what everyone stores and what systems are on them, it is a real headache to try and work out. But what I would say is we often do strategies for SIOs to say why we're not doing it, rather than just doing it for doing its sake. If we've got somebody that is listening to us and is good at policy and the rationale with policy as well in investigative decision making, then there will be occasions when we have those conversations and we say, no, we're not doing the examination, and we'll put some good rationale as to why we're not doing it. It may be based on knowledge from previous examinations of systems installed on the vehicle. You have to look at the overarching needs of the investigation. What are you actually trying to prove by doing this? And that comes into any strategy as to why you're going to do something. It can be applied to anything really. But yes, if you've got a car that is fairly old, that doesn't have the facility to connect digital devices to it, then it may be an argument to say we're not going to do that because your need is to put somebody in the car through a digital pairing. It ain't going to happen. So you do have to take a step back. And what I should say on this point as well, don't assume that every new car is going to have data on it of all types, because not all new cars have certain functionalities. They're built for different markets. Some cars are low spec and they just don't have the technologies inside them to record what you think they're recording as well. And that's why it goes down to having a good resource and a good knowledge base from staff who can give you that guidance and say whether or not it's proportionate to continue with that investigation. But thanks for raising that point, Ian, because it is a really, really valid one. It sometimes is just a tick box to say you've done it. And the amount of work that's involved in doing a vehicle examination, it is quite labour intensive for those staff, and it may be that they could be utilised in other areas, giving you more tangible information to work with in your investigation as well. Okay, so that is headache number 5, where we wrap things up in these series of headaches. We will return again for another series in the future, but I think for now we've got enough to